John's life was played out on such a vast stage that people tend to view him in panoramic proportions. But I remember him in snapshots. Hundreds of high-contrast, multi-dimensional pictures, some drenched in prismatic color, others in stark black and white. Some have begun to fade, others remain as sharp and focused as the day he became part of our lives. I want to tell you about John beyond the veil of entertainer and bridge the distance between superstar and fan, because much of his efforts were predicated upon this directive. When he referred to himself as a working-class hero, it was not metaphorical. He was the one who took the makeup off first. He was a non-show-busy guy. He spoke to you in a clear, intimate, truthful voice. At the time, that was rare. That accounted for people thinking of his passing as a death in the family. When people ask me, who was the real John Lennon, I always say, you already know, because he never kept anything secret. He was real. He was exactly what was advertised, revered, and sometimes scorned. He just put it out there. Nothing was censored or altered for mass consumption. It was a take-it-or-leave-it position. He wanted your attention, not your vote. He was an emotional provocateur. That was his charm. That was the beauty of the exchange. We met in 1971. He ran out of time in 1980. The 9 years shared with John were a gift. The 35 with Yoko remain a blessing. I was a disc jockey in 1971 and had interviewed hundreds of culture heroes of the times. The first day I met John and Yoko in person, they gave me an acetate recording sometime in New York City. The record included such pop ditties as Attica State, Free Angela Davis, The Pope Smokes Dope, Woman is the N of the World, and a number of other really catchy tunes that would be immediately embraced by Clear Channel. In reality, it would get no airplay because, of course, nobody would touch it. John, with much fanfare, handed me the acetate with no label on it. It had just come from the recording studio, and he said, "We've decided that you're going to be able to play the record first. You're going to break the record exclusively. We want you to take this back to L.A. and play it on the radio." To me, this was a great media opportunity. I was going to break a new John and Yoko album on the air. I drove directly to the station, but didn't have an acetate player in my car, so I never had the chance to hear it. I went back to the radio station and I played it without commercial interruption, without intros or back announcements. I just said, for the next hour, let's just all kick back and listen to something by John and Yoko. You've never heard it before? It's brand new, and I'm fortunate enough to share it with you exclusively. In those days, on freeform FM radio, you could do things like that without asking for permission. The music resonated with me like I Want to Hold Your Hand resonated with the generation that preceded me, and the way Thriller did with the generation that followed. But even more than the music, even more than the record, was the purity and the innocence of these two people who would put it all on the line. The cover had a picture of Richard Nixon and Chairman Mao dancing together naked. Yoko felt that if that really took place, they would get to know each other better, and we'd have a greater chance of peace in the world. although the record certainly would not fly off the shelves at Kmart, for those who heard it and those who got it, the experience would impact their lives. I can recall the expression on the engineer's face through the glass of his brightly lit booth. I listened to the music through earphones. Undoubtedly thoughts were racing through his head. Should we continue playing this? Will I lose my license for this frightening piece of propaganda? Should I lift the tone arm off the disc? He appeared to be shaken by it. That was the first public reaction. By the time we got to Scumbag, I knew I better get the resume out. The station did let me go, claiming they were experimenting with their format. I called John and Yoko. John asked, had to go. He was really excited. I said, I've got good news and I've got bad news. The good news is that I played it from start to finish without any commercial breaks. He said, that's great, that's so effing great. I heard him say to Yoko off the receiver, he played the whole record. We got all the songs on the air. It's been on the radio. I said, as for the bad news, I may be looking for a new place to work. He thought that was hilarious, the funniest thing in the world. And he said, well, we're driving up to San Francisco, pack a bag, and join the circus. And I did. I always viewed him as a softy. That was the persona I found most engaging. If he were listening to us now, as Yoko is convinced he is, there would be a slight rumble at this point because he liked the idea of being thought of as a strong, assertive, no-nonsense rocker. He was raised on Elvis, Carl Perkins, Jerry Lee Lewis, Little Richard, a band of gypsy musicians that took root in the 1950s and sprang to life 10 years later. Of course, that was the pedigree. But there was so much more. I remember the first time I met him, how soft his hands were. I had interviewed lots of musicians because I was a disc jockey, so I did a lot of handshaking. They had rough hands from playing guitar, calloused fingers, long nails to pull on the strings. But John's hands weren't working men's hands. Those hands never used a shovel. If you look at photos of him in a t-shirt, he had what appeared to be muscleless arms. John was close to 6 feet, but appeared smaller. He was delicate in his ways. He prepared tea carefully. He was fastidious and neat. He didn't like crumbs on the kitchen table or papers strewn about on a couch. There was a certain kind of civility in his interactions and in his speaking style when he did not have to deal with those who were seeking Beetle John. John, Yoko, and I spent a great deal of time, perhaps the majority of our time together, in their bedroom. The bed was made up of 2 antique church pews that were placed opposite each other, with a piece of plywood between them and a queen-size mattress placed on top. The bedding was simple, and John slept soundly on a flat pillow. His dreams appeared in colors. John used to say that they did their best work in bed. He was not being sardonic. They wrote in bed, they drew pictures, made their phone calls. He made his tape recordings. He had an acoustic guitar hanging above the bed that he would take down to play. That's where he watched his big-screen TV that he purchased in Tokyo, one of the first to be imported to the United States, so he could watch the news. That's where he kept his little old English box, that contained stationery and pens and pencils. That's where he wrote his letters, answered fan mail, pasted collages, read his newspapers, listened to radio talk shows, smoked a little weed, and where he would sometimes have his tea. It was a world within a larger world where he could watch the changing colors of the sky through the tall windows and be still. There was a white wicker chair that leaned against the wall on Yoko's side of the bed. We would sit in that room and we would talk, debate, joke endlessly for hours at a time. We would begin at 6 p.m. Yoko would doze off for an hour cat nap. John would be on one side, I would be in the wicker chair, and when she grew bored with the boys debating something that she had long ago realized, she closed her eyes and would go to sleep. John and I would continue, talking more softly. Our deepest and most meaningful exchanges took place in that room. Years before, Brian Epstein, the manager of the Beatles, was quoted as saying his favorite time was when just the 5 of them would be in a room together. For me, those countless hours in the wicker chair with John and Yoko were enough. Everything else was just dessert. Occasionally, we would put on our jackets. John would wrap a scarf around his neck, place a woolen hat or a familiar-looking cap on his head, adjust his glasses, and make sure the right boots fit with his non-designer jeans. We would take the elevator in the Dakota building down to the street. 10 seconds after the gate opened, it was another experience. It was the experience that fame had touched. He had gotten used to it, he would tell me. He was famous in Liverpool when he was 16. It just got bigger, he used to say. The stage expanded. The audience grew. But he was always famous and dealt with the attention more seamlessly than all the others I ever observed.